Hey everyone, Cleo here, and today we're talking about the books that I got along with the best this year, my favorite books of 2023. No, not 2023, 2022. Finally got used to saying 2023 and now I need to talk about 2022. These 10 books, while I ranked them to some extent, they are random in the sense that I feel like if you ask me this order another day, I might just change my mind about it. Actually, I made an order and it's always possible for me to actually deviate from it throughout this process because I found it quite difficult to rank these, and especially since I read quite widely. This is going to be a list of 10 books. It is going to be a mix of speculative fiction and realistic fiction, but I think it is more leaning towards the speculative side this year in particular. But so let's just get into it. So the first book, my number 10 spot for this year, is going to go to a book that quite surprised me in how much I ended up enjoying it. It's a book that I didn't initially think I was going to enjoy as much as I ended up enjoying it, and perhaps if I try to look at it objectively, though of course no reading is objective, no review is ever going to be fully objective, perhaps it isn't as quality proof as some of the other entries on this list, but I definitely feel like it couldn't be left off. I couldn't leave it off, and that is The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. I really enjoyed this one a whole lot. I was kind of hesitant going into it because I knew that even though this book is adult, a lot of people were saying that it reads quite YA, and while I can see where people are coming from with that, I definitely had a great time with this one, and I just really loved its sort of darker atmosphere. It perhaps is a lot more action heavy than the books that I typically enjoy when it comes to fantasy reads, but it definitely also, while having that action-heavy plot, dives into quite dark of an atmosphere, and I just really ate it up every single second of the way. So in this one we're looking at our protagonist, who is called the Midnight Merchants. She is a woman who is at the top of the underworld. She is a criminal who hunts and sells illegal magic. She has a djinn companion whose identity needs to be kept in the dark because the djinn are very much looked down upon in this world. They are feared, they are loathed, and they are hunted. And early on in this book, our Midnight Merchant, Luli, is given an assignment where she needs to travel together with her djinn companion and a famous djinn hunter to find a very powerful relic. As I said, it is a little bit on the darker side. The djinn magic portrayed in this one definitely goes a little bit dark and gloomy, but I absolutely ate it up. All in all, I just thought this one was a super fun ride, and I was engrossed throughout and really wanted to continue when I finished it. Coming into my 9th spot is an author with a very extensive backlist that I definitely want to explore more of in future, and that is Guy Gavriel Kay with A Song for Our Bomb. So I read this one because Kirsten's Fully Booked was doing a read-along for it, and I am so happy that I picked this book up on a whim because basically I didn't really have time for it in my schedule, and it was just the fact that she made this one sound so good that made me just pick it up on a whim, and I'm so happy for it because I really enjoyed this one a whole lot. I think the writing style really works very well for me. This is very close to just being historical fiction. It is fantastical in the sense that the world in which the story is taking place is a fictionalized version of basically France, and there is some mysticism within this book that kind of verges on fantasy, but there is no magic, there are no fantastical beings or anything like that. For the most part, this is just historical fantasy. And so in this one, we're looking at a conflict between two kingdoms. Basically, we have the kingdom of Arbonne, which is a more emancipated kingdom in which women are adored by troubadours, and it gives more of an equal footing between women and men within this society. On the other hand, we have their neighboring kingdom, Gorha. Okay, cannot pronounce this anymore. Gorhot? Have I ever? I don't remember whether I listened to this. Yeah, I think I listened to it and now I don't really remember how to pronounce this. But so, Gorhot is their neighboring kingdom, and that is very much a sort of macho-based culture. It's very much kind of what we expect when we go into medieval fantasy, where we have a very much male-dominant society. Women are very much treated as secondary citizens, and especially within this culture, they're treated with derision and they're very much taken advantage of as well. And so we have a conflict between these two kingdoms, where Gorhot is trying to extend its influence, potentially invade Arbonne, because they want to show what a real man is like. So we have this thematic of the emancipation of women at the background of this. What mainly made me love this one is its writing style. It's just a really easy but at the same time beautiful writing style that worked really well for me. This book is also divided amongst the seasons, which also is a very nice way to structure a story. And yeah, I definitely want to try out more Guy Gavriel Kay in the future. In my 8th spot, I'm going to put another fantasy, and that is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. So this is a first book in a series called the Rook and Rose series trilogy. The 3rd book is going to come out in August, I believe. I do still have the 2nd book to catch up to, but I am very much looking forward to that, because this is another book where the moment I put it down, I was like, I need the sequel right now. And it was only because I've only read this in November, so only like a little over a month has gone by since reading this, that I haven't got around to the sequel yet. In this one we're looking at our protagonist, who is called Ren, I believe. Yeah, Ren. Ren is a con artist who basically, when she was a young child, was basically taken in by this woman running a criminal organization. She got really close to 2 other children there, and together they ended up killing the owner of this establishment and running for their lives. She, along with another girl who survived the society, are now returning to the city of the crime in order to scam a family out of their fortune. However, what they don't know is that this family is actually also in financial difficulties. So with this one, the thing that I enjoyed the most was the layering of the intrigue. So there are a lot of mysteries, a lot of motivations that are a little bit hazy or a little bit in the dark. You're following multiple characters, and so you get to know about their motivations, their situations in life, and so you can kind of see past the knowledge of other characters. You kind of see how certain motivations will end up clashing with one another, how certain people can work together to get what they've always wanted out of life, and the mystery of a sort of like Zorro character at the background as well also really kept me intrigued, as I kind of at certain points in the story thought that the author was going in one direction with that and ended up going in different directions. I also really appreciated that it had a sort of like tarot card magic at the background of it as well. I'm personally not somebody who really understands or looks into tarot, but I do enjoy seeing it in this magical setting. And originally the story doesn't really involve a lot of magic, but as we get further along throughout the story, this becomes a much bigger plot points. In 7th position, I'm placing one of the realistic fiction works on here, and that is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid, which is one of the books that I read for Project Zero TBR, and I'm very happy that a few of those at least made it onto this list as well. Such a Fun Age is a story all about allyship and about fake allyship. So basically, at the center of this story are 2 women, a white woman and her black nanny. And so originally these 2 women don't necessarily have any sort of a strong bond amongst themselves. Now the whole dynamics between the 2 of them change because of an incident that takes place early on in the story. So early on in the story, Amira, I think the name of the nanny is. So an altercation takes place at the house of Alex, the white woman, and she asks Amira to come over and to take her daughter away for a few hours in order for them to deal with the police. Amira takes this child to the supermarket and kind of tries to entertain her over there. However, a security guard comes in to ask her questions, indicating that there's a suspicion that she might have kidnapped the child. Now this situation is quickly resolved, however it also seems to spark some sort of an interest in Alex. Alex all of a sudden feels the need to protect her nanny, to get to know her nanny, to create some sort of a bond with her, where before she hadn't really felt that need at all. And so the book kind of explores that dynamic and the motivations behind Alex's actions, as well as the performativeness of the actions that she undertakes. And so I thought that it doesn't just look at a very interesting thematic and a very interesting exploration of character and character motivations, but it also is a page turner. I flew through this one so much, got so much secondhand embarrassment as well while I was reading this. And aside from that, I just think it's an important read as well. It's an important read to make you think about your actions and the motivations that perhaps go into those as well. But so yeah, highly recommend this one. I was so upset with myself for waiting so long for reading it, because I did purchase this around the time in which it was getting so much hype, basically even already late. I knew about this book from the moment it was published. I waited until it was put on the Booker prize long list, I believe, to purchase it, and then I waited another almost year before I finally read it, and then I absolutely adored it. So of course you cannot always get to the books as quickly as you want to, but with this one I definitely felt like, why did I wait so long? Directly moving into another book that I read during Project Zero TBR, and another one of the realistic fiction works on this list, and then we get to And the Mountains Echoed by Khaled Hosseini. So this is a really interesting one because in this story basically every chapter is told from a different POV. Nonetheless, we do get a cohesive whole. We just have many different stories that to some extent interact with one another. And the interesting about that structure is that from the very get-go you want to know what happens to two particular characters in this story, and you are kind of left wanting more. And because of this structure of using a different POV every single chapter, you're kind of left waiting when it comes to that resolution. However, every single chapter still offers you a little bit more insight, a little bit more perspective into the history of this family in particular, or into different aspects of what is taking place, and ultimately providing enough puzzle pieces for you to get to the whole. So at the onset of the story we have a father who's traveling with his daughter to a neighboring village. He is quickly caught up by his son, who wants to join them on this walk, and it quickly becomes clear that his father is actually giving away the girl. And so brother and sister are very close to one another. They're basically bosom buddies. They rely upon each other. They absolutely adore and love one another. And so this event is very much a trauma for both of them because they are basically torn apart. And so throughout the story you want to see whether they end up ever reuniting or not. This structure, I believe, is what for some people makes this one the one that they enjoyed by Khaled Hosseini the least. I still have The Kite Runner to go, which is his most favorite work, but I think I enjoyed this one more than I enjoyed his A Thousand Splendid Suns, but that one also was a 5-star read, don't get me wrong, but this multiple POV structure ended up really paying out for me. And what I also very much enjoyed about this one is that we got quite a few disabled perspectives. We didn't necessarily always get a disabled perspective, we also sometimes got the perspective of a loved one or of a caretaker, for example, which we definitely had a lot of disabled storylines within this one. And I particularly appreciated the storyline of one woman who basically has a disfigurement, but is also very clear about the fact that this disfigurement does not take away from her worth or her value, and how she emphasizes how much this disability, this disfigurement is part of who she is, and that if people cannot appreciate her for who she is because of this disfigurement, then they probably don't have a space in her life. So yeah, absolutely enjoyed this one, highly recommend as well. I mean, all of these obviously I'm gonna highly recommend because they're the ones that I enjoyed the most throughout this year. In my number 4 spot is the only book that I physically own, and that is The Membranes by Chi Ta-wei. So this is a translated work. It is translated from Chinese. It is a Taiwanese novel. It is also a queer cult classic. So basically in this one we are looking at a future world in which humanity has had to reform its population by living under the ocean. So we are living under these sort of like giant domes under the oceans, and so the ocean is a membrane that's separating us from a toxic wasteland, basically. And our protagonist is a woman who's basically grown up underground all of her life, and she basically runs a beauty salon and is very much famed for a specific treatment she has where she rubs in a certain ointment, and that basically creates a sort of like second skin, a membrane around people's bodies. And so in this one we are basically exploring the backstory of this woman. We're kind of looking at a period in her life, in her childhood, in which she had some sort of an ailment which meant that she was like all of the time in hospital, and in hospital she had this very close-knit relationship with a small child as well, and we're kind of looking into that, trying to figure out what happened, what was wrong with her, what is the deal with her relationship with this child, how has this resolved into her being estranged from her mother at this point in time. And it's basically her mother trying to reach out to her again that triggers the trip down memory lane. And so I absolutely enjoyed this one. It has been a long time, so there are less details about this one that stick to my mind, but I remember being blown away by this one and absolutely adoring it. I loved the metaphors that were like intertwined throughout this narrative. Membranes come back throughout the story. There's also something to do with a canary that I've forgotten about, but there was also a deeper layer there, or it was also sort of like thematic motif that kept on running through the novel. So I loved the way that it was crafted. I thought it was masterfully crafted, and I absolutely enjoyed my experience with this. I now actually find out that I only made a top 9, and I have a 10 book, but I don't actually know where it belongs now, so I'm gonna have to think about that. Basically, as I was going through that list, I was constantly trying to find out, like, what am I comfortable putting in this position? And for certain books, you know, it meant that I had to keep them until the very end. This book clearly also, because I never ended up placing it, but I think that this is probably the spot where it belongs, and that is The Final Strife by Sara El Arifi. So this is my 4th spot. I wrongfully said it with the last book, but this is the 4th spot. So The Final Strife is the first book in a trilogy, I believe it's also going to be. Second book is going to come out this year. It is my most anticipated read for this year, so I'm absolutely looking forward to it. And this is another one of those books that just absolutely stole my heart when I read it. In this one we're looking at 3 protagonists, 2 protagonists to be fair, and one is more of a side protagonist. We do get perspectives from told through her lens, but they are more spread out throughout the story. And in this one we're looking at a society that is divided by the color of their blood. Basically red-blooded people, red blood is at the top, blue blood is in the middle, and transparent blood is at the bottom. And when I say the bottom, I absolutely mean the bottom. They are basically kept as slaves to some extent, because they have their tongues ripped out at birth, and I think also their hands and their feet maybe. And I think also their hands, definitely they have certain body parts mutilated at birth in order to prevent them from basically having any type of voice, any type of agency. And they are very much looked down upon by the rest of society. Each one of our protagonists will represent one of these blood types. And basically about decades before the start of this book, an attempt was made to steal a lot of children of the elite in order to replace these children by blue-blooded children, in order to raise these red-blooded children in such a way that they would one day be able to take over leadership roles and change the fate for blue-blooded people. This one is very much in your face. It's very much on the nose. It's definitely not hiding its thematics, but since the thematics that are running through this have to deal with classism, with racism, with slave trade and all of those things, I do think that it's important to have books like this as well, books that clearly use fantastical settings to talk about real-world problems. Books that leave you no doubt about what it is that they are addressing. Aside from that, this book is also queer. It is also talking about disability struggles. As indicated earlier, people of transparent blood are basically given disabilities at birth because of the mutilations that they go through, and so I enjoyed the representation level within this one as well. This is just also a fun ride, an addictive ride, and so I also absolutely look forward to the second book, especially since this book towards the end definitely was making some revelations that I didn't see coming, or taking some turns that I hadn't expected. So in my 3rd spot, and I didn't necessarily see it coming, because there definitely are some things about the ending that I don't enjoy about this one, but overall this book has really stolen my heart, so I just couldn't put it anywhere else, and that would be Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wang. So this is a self-published fantasy. In principle it can be seen as a standalone, though it is a companion standalone to a YA fantasy series which currently is unfinished. In this one we're looking at the Matsuda family. Basically we're mostly looking at the mother of the family and her eldest son, so at Misaki and her eldest son Mamoru. Misaki is a woman who basically was trained to be a warrior in a foreign land. However, she ended up deciding to return to her home island and to settle down and marry traditionally into the Matsuka family. The Matsukas are basically the sort of like top warriors of this society, and this society is very much a warrior-based culture. They are the stronghold that protect the island and that protect the empire against the potential invasions of Rangani soldiers, as has happened in the past. However, early on questions are raised about the way in which history has been narrated, the way in which past events have been painted, the way in which this warrior culture has been raised up, and thus this book raises question about the reliability and the honesty of its regime. I absolutely fell in love. Misaki is like my favorite character now since having read this one. She is a strong mother figure. a tough warrior but also a flawed character, and I absolutely fell in love with her storyline. I loved that this book has a very untraditional story arc as well. It definitely has its peak towards the middle of this book, in which we have like a 100-page action sequence that basically is the culmination of the action or of the plot to some extent. Not to say that afterwards I was bored or anything like that. It's just that we barely got to the same heights in terms of action later on within this book, which is not what you typically see with a fantasy story. I did definitely, as I said, have some issues with the ending, specifically because this ending sets up for the YA fantasy series, and I believe as a full standalone it could have ended in a much more satisfactory manner. I did not necessarily enjoy all the things that we were going into towards that ending, but aside from that, I've just loved the rest of this book so much that I couldn't put it lower in this list. I cannot take too much away because of that ending neither, because for the rest of that I adored it. I am clearly fighting against the light here, so the lighting in this video is not going to be great. But I need to film this video at some point, and that's the annoying thing about the winter period. The runner-up for my best book of the year is going to be Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. It is interesting to note that the second and third spot on this list are books that I read in December. Basically, maybe they're getting some advantage because I've just read them, but I absolutely adored both of these as well. Lessons in Chemistry is a historical fiction in which we're mainly zoning in on the difficulties of women in the 60s having to deal with misogyny. Our protagonist is a woman who is a scientist, however she's constantly limited in her scientific career because of the expectations of her male colleagues, the prejudices that they have against her. And so this book is basically set across two timelines. We are introduced to our protagonist Elizabeth Zott at a later age originally, in which she has a child already and she's basically confronting the father of one of the children in her daughter's class because his daughter is basically stealing her daughter's lunch. And this father is basically a TV producer, and he kind of sees something in Elizabeth and tries to recruit her in order to work for TV. However, we then quickly jump back into her past and kind of make our way back to present day in order to figure out how she ended up in a situation where she would take a TV job when we know that she was trying to be a scientist. And so I very much enjoyed this one. It's another one that's like such a fast-paced page turner that I just wanted to devour in one sitting. And it's another one of those protagonists that I just absolutely fell in love with. I very much appreciate the storyline, the way that it was handled, and the way that when Elizabeth became a TV show, her main goal was just to be able to raise up women's self-awareness and women's sense of self. You know, the people that she is addressing her TV show to were seen as just housewives. However, she never treated them as that. She always tried to give them a sense of self, tried to establish a lot of self-confidence in them and self-worth in their role, pride in them being the cornerstone of the household. Very much enjoyed this one, a strong debut. With this one, also with the ending, I had a few issues where I felt like all of the sort of like problems, everything that was left unresolved was resolved all in one go, all in one particular scene, and I would have loved to see that develop over a bigger stretch of period, because now it felt a little bit Deus Ex Machina like, and so that's my one concern with this book. And then we get to the final book, and before I went into this list, so before I kind of sat down to try and rank these books, this was not the book that I expected to land in there, which does not mean that it's like a surprise neither. It's definitely a book that has been front and center in my mind ever since reading it. I just didn't necessarily expect it to make it all the way to the top, and that is Tender is the Flesh by Agostina Bastarica. So this is a dystopian novel, it is horror, and in this one we are looking at a future society in which there has been some sort of a virus that has affected all animal flesh, meaning that we as humans can no longer safely consume animals, and instead of producing animal flesh, we are now producing human flesh. This one very much emphasizes how capitalism has made it possible to completely distance yourself from a product and completely distance yourself from a process. As long as you can make a process out of something, you can completely dehumanize the actions that you are taking. The protagonist in this story story is basically somebody who is working in a breeding center. So he basically breeds people in order to be consumed as flesh afterwards. However, he never considers them to be people, neither. He always refers to them as the product, or he refers to them as heads, as if they are just one body part and not the whole. And there are many actions being taken throughout this book that help there be a barrier between the people who are living their day-to-day life and those who are only kept alive long enough until they are able to be consumed. And I thought it was very interesting and just horrific to read. And for me personally, and I know that this is not necessarily the case with everybody, but for me personally, because the perspective that we're reading from is so detached from the actions itself, it actually made this worse. It made this more horrifying because it made it much more realistic. It used the way in which we currently talk about animal consumption, the way that we distance ourselves from this process in order to be able to consume animal flesh, and just juxtaposes that situation onto the consumption of human flesh. The ending to this book is also sort of like hit or miss, I feel, with a lot of people. For me personally, I think this works very well. A lot of times in this book, because this is the only perspective we're reading from, we are given sort of the impression that our protagonist is sort of the only one who still sees the cruelty in what is being done. However, he has been struggling throughout the book with the actions that he's taking and with the direction that his life has gone through, because originally when he started in this business we were still consuming animal flesh. So he started off as a livestock trader basically, and now he has to use all of his skills that he learned on the production of animal flesh in order to do the same sort of actions onto other human beings. And we see some of his struggles, we start to feel for him, we start to see him as the exception to the rule, and then this ending kind of reframes our understanding of him and of his actions and of what people are capable of doing. And yeah, I just thought this one was super interesting and just looks into an interesting hypothetical scenario and really makes us think about not just what would happen in this scenario, but what is currently going on in the meat production. So with that, we've had all of the books on this list. As I said earlier, this is not a hard and steady list. Multiple books on this list could on any other given day be my favorite book of the year. I do definitely feel okay today giving you this order that I made over a week ago, so I do definitely think that this order makes sense for me, but it isn't the case that, you know, book number 4, book number 5 on this list are that far away from being my favorite book of the year neither. This year I did not have a clear standout. It has not been the case. I know that in the past I've had years in which there were like 2 books in which I was doubting between, for example. This year I didn't have a clear-cut winner in mind before going into this list, but that also just means that there were a lot more books that I loved equally. And as you can see, with some of these I have some reasons why I don't fully adore them, or why I think that, or some aspects to them that I find to be flawed, but sometimes those books end up higher than the ones that I cannot really find flaw with, because these opinions are subjective. My appreciation of a book is subjective, and so certain books just hit you harder, or you end up having a deeper bond with, and you don't necessarily always have a way of figuring out or of putting into words what makes that book more special to you than others. With that, I'm gonna end this video. See you guys for the next one. Bye!